my experiences of 2015 AERA meeting is incredibly different and incredibly sad. We, in the previous AERA meetings, spent hours talking about issues, his projects, and his plans. And this AERA, I missed him deeply. I remember his unequivocal friendship, his generosity of spirit, his analytical mind, his political commitments, and his many other qualities that others have spoken of. But today, I want to touch on something other that I really admired about Greg, his remarkable hospitality. He was hospitable in so many senses that I cannot count. The first time I visited and stayed in his home in Buffalo was in 2009. He took me around for a drive, showing me the crumbling old buildings of Buffalo, pointing out their histories and their significance to the city. He knew Buffalo, I realized, and was very pleased to share his enormous knowledge of the city too. I was really very pleased and impressed. During the midst of our travels, I told him that I had been reading a book by Raj Patel called Value of Nothing, in which there was a joke. And the joke went something like this: how many Chicago-trained economists does it take to change the light globe? The answer, none. Because if the light globe needed changing, then the market would have done it already. He laughed and laughed and laughed, raucously. In fact, I had never seen him laugh so much. And then 2 hours later, out of nowhere, he started laughing again. So much so that around 6 o'clock, I had to tell him that the joke was funny, but not that funny. That night, we went off to sleep to our rooms. Little did I realize that he would go and get the book and would have read most of it before breakfast. He had read it in Kindle form that had just arrived as a new technology. Really impressive. His hospitality was great, but so was his commitment to do something for me so that we could share an analysis of the book. That was the purpose of reading the book. Last year, this time, my wife and I visited and saw Greg with his Michelle. This was 3 days that we will never forget. It was a wonderful, wonderful 3 days. He was happy, he was joking, he was making jokes, better ones than I had told him. And indeed, he was playing with us and with his cats. And indeed, the affection that he showed with Michelle was, and they were united in their hospitality. The hospitality and the generosity that they showed us. And that generosity will remain with me. He was a generous man in every sense of the word. And I remember him for not only his intellectual qualities, the things that we've all talked about, but indeed, hospitality. That is a term that I will forever associate with Greg. He became kind of a little brother to me towards the end. And I think it is simply appropriate to say, now in conclusion, rest in peace, my little brother. Thank you.
Next speaker is Jennifer.
Nadine and Adam, thank you for bringing us together this afternoon to remember and celebrate Greg. To Greg's family, to Michelle. William Blake, the English poet, painter, and printmaker, wrote these words: "Some persons of a scientific turn were once discoursing pomposity, and to him, quite distastefully, about the incredible distance of the planets, the length of time light takes to travel to the earth, and so on. When he burst out, 'Tis false. I was walking down the lane the other day, and at the end of it, I touched the sky with my cane." I believe that an amalgam of perceptiveness, foresight, and intellect enabled Greg to see and touch the sky in ways that others could not or would not. And at the same time, because of these capacities, Greg's quiet, unassuming, always thoughtful and sensitive presence sometimes belied his fierce aversions to pompous pronouncements of any kind. In fact, I once observed as Greg, no flurry, no shaking of his head, no stomping of his feet, literally walked away from some who were claiming with absolute certainty to a room filled with difference their iterations of truth as applicable to everyone across all times and contexts. I was fortunate to share many conversations with Greg's, as well as to participate on some conference panels with him over the years, and to attend a number of sessions in which he spoke. I often marvel not only at his steadfast rejection of those refusing difference in all of its myriad complexities and possibilities, but also at his extensive grasp of academic fields and knowledges upon which he drew to both confront and refute what he saw as normative violences against those positioned as other. Greg also took exception to accounts of teaching, curriculum, and learning deemed as always able to be systematized across differences, as well as to be predetermined, codified, measured. And he pushed back mightily against positivist educational research conceived yet once again as the one and only gold standard for generating, via a logic of verification, absolute proof of what works in education. Greg instead focused lots on what's not working and for whom. He was always asking about what specific circumstances, for example, what material and discursive conditions, what social, cultural, and historically inflected forces, practices, and mores, and even what possible agentic aspects of the non-human world were at work in any one arena, any specific educational context. He was constantly curious, wondering, in fact, about not just how, but also why the social sciences might and could be done. Greg intensely interrogated the whys in order to call attention, especially to the lives of those who are subjugated, disqualified, ignored. I think that these commitments, combined with his incessant inquisitiveness, are those qualities that in part compelled Greg to range across a number of disciplinary areas that intersect or at least bump up against each other in their traditional configurations. I think he constantly was intrigued with interdisciplinarity and worked in those ways for one very specific reason: to imagine and to enact justice in heretofore unseen ways. I think his commitments to all persons directly and indirectly affected by educational inequities accounted for his substantial, sustained, and eloquent scholarship that I think astonished almost all of us in its breadth and complexity. Greg's whys for the doing of qualitative research, for example, spoke to what he saw as the still desperate need for elongated and in-depth educational inquiries into subjugated youth's needs, desires, fears, and aspirations for themselves, both within and without education contexts. Most prominently then, I believe that Greg's pedagogical and research ethics are what impelled him to see and touch that which others sometimes would not even consider. I most often spoke with Greg in the context of our shared academic interests, especially at the intersections of curriculum studies and qualitative research. One early evening at the Bergamo Curriculum Theory Conference, Greg and I sat together in the courtyard of that conference center. It was unusually mild for that October, but we were the only two welcoming the early show of stars before the night darkness would drape the benches and the intersecting sidewalks of that small square. Greg was prompting me to sort through some of the ebbs and flows of the Bergamo conference. He wanted to know from my situated perspectives more details about some of the primary scholarly emphases that had debuted there. He wondered how I would describe some of the tensions as well as the congruences that had marked the journal and its conference across its 30-year-plus years at that point. For indeed, Greg, along with Adam Howard, had assumed leadership of the journal and of Bergamo after the 2007 conference. They both would step down from those leadership roles after the 2012 conference, but in this particular twilight, Greg most specifically was asking me about the beginnings of Bergamo as it has become to be known informally. He wanted to know lots of details about my work as founding managing editor of JCT, Journal of Curriculum Theorizing, and about, and that was from its inception in 1978 through 1998. And he wanted to know about my duties related to the JCT-sponsored Bergamo Annual Conference for many years. So as dusk melded into early evening in that courtyard, against the backdrop of my briefly reviewed histories, we segued into a conversation that focused on Greg's perceptions of possible emphases that he thought he would want to further develop in his role of associate editor of JCT. And he did this all in the name of service. We talked about these roles and the work of putting together a conference and working within a journal as service. This was service. And so he was really concerned about how he could further support and lend support to Adam, who was working then as the JCT editor, and he wanted to support the whole leadership team of the organization. But this was all in service, of course, of the field of curriculum studies writ large. So he ran different ideas and goals that he thought, that the journal and the conference might benefit from. Neither of us was interested in any smooth sequential notion of progress that would supposedly causally link the Bergamo past with any version of the present. Neither of us was interested in any version of a current Bergamo that would only repeat that which had come before. Greg was adamant, however, in stating that he thought it was really important that new scholars do understand historical context and impetus for forming this journal and this conference. He wanted everyone to understand the histories of education writ large across all contexts. And he wanted to talk especially about what difficulties might stand in the paths of those who were theorizing in the beginnings of this conference and journal, for example, what were then really unconventional conceptions of curriculum. And he wanted to know, too, what all these varied efforts opened up for us all, even as I kept reminding him of all of the associated fraughtnesses, discontinuities, fractures, and upheavals that accompanied those labors. Bring it on, he said to me. So we laughed together, and I'll always remember that big long laugh we had about that, and we rose to join the evening's keynote session. Greg never shied away from the difficulties and conundrums in the doings of the kind of research and teaching and advising and writing and serving of others in which he so fervently believed. And in so doing, he saw so far beyond pomposities, beyond empty promises and grandiose claims. Through the haze of our sadness and our collective sense of profound loss then, I hope that we will always remember Greg's vision, his profound abilities to touch each of us as he also strove to see, reach for, and touch the sky.
I'm Lois Weis. I chaired the search committee that hired Greg at the University at Buffalo. And such a wonderful hire. Greg was my colleague and close friend for 15 years. And we all grieve today, and I, of course, grieve a great deal. Greg was deeply dedicated to the academy. Situated at the University of Buffalo, he devoted much of his time and intellectual energy to the work of this university, our colleagues, our students,